when Dinesh released his documentary about these far left. So let's go over briefly what 2000 Mules shows. It shows this phone tracking data of what he calls mules. These 2,000 individuals who are going to 10, sometimes 50 plus drop boxes. But between going to these drop boxes and stuffing ballots, they're visiting these nonprofit organizations. And Trevor, when I heard these nonprofit organizations, it reminded me of something you told me on the show before, because I remember you were warning about these nonprofit organizations that were doing these voting drives and so on. And you were talking about some of their communist and even foreign connections, right? Tell me a bit about that. Like, what was your first reaction when you saw 2000 Mules? And then let's go deeper into this.
Well, I was thinking exactly. I'm very keen to see what these organizations are, because as I identified, there was a network of organizations set up by pro-Chinese communists in 2017, in 2019, and it was overlapped considerably with Black Lives Matter. And in Indonesia's movie, you talked about many of these activists they tracked were involved with Black Lives Matter. So
that's right. That's right. The phone data was showing they were going to the protests. Yeah.
Yeah. So what my argument was about, there was a network of organizations set up by the Chinese Progressive Association out of San Francisco, which is a complete front for the Communist Party of China. They called it Seed the Vote. And they set up these organizations in 7 key swing states. Black Leaders Organizing Communities in Wisconsin, Detroit Action in Michigan, Lucha in Arizona, New Georgia Project in Georgia, Pennsylvania Stands Up and obviously in Pennsylvania. And they claim they won 6 of the 7 states they targeted for Biden-Harris. And all of these organizations are connected to Liberation Road, the pro-Chinese communist group that gave us Black Lives Matter. They're connected back to the Chinese Progressive Association and connected back to the CCP. So it seems, I am betting that there'll be a considerable overlap between the organizations that Dinesh has identified and the organizations I identified as a Chinese affiliated voter registration network back in 2020. I'm betting there's a big overlap here.
It would make sense. Trevor, let's go deeper into this. I remember when the story came out, when it was one of the Black Lives Matter websites, it actually linked, on their donation page, it linked to that Chinese, I believe it was Chinese Progressive Association, the San Francisco-based one. And I was shocked because New York Times came out with a fact check on it and said, oh, this is not a Chinese front organization or something like that. Like, okay, let me explain, because I'm one of like the few, I'm probably one of the few experts on these Chinese fraternal organizations called Tongs, right? The way Tongs work, again, Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Associations, things like that. These are basically the unofficial governing bodies of Chinese communities. They existed previously in Chinese society historically because they didn't have government typically below the county level. But below the county level, they had a bottom-up form of government. These were like guilds, family associations, and things like that. When Chinese people immigrated to the U.S. and to other countries, it was these organizations that facilitated a lot of that. So they run the human trafficking operations. They call them snakeheads. And they also work as the unofficial governing bodies. Underneath the Tongs are the triads, the Chinese mafia, oftentimes. Not all of these organizations are bad. Many are very good. When the Chinese Communist Party wanted to begin infiltrating other countries, though, to gain influence over politics, especially openly, they talk about this, political warfare. They even have a military branch called the General Political Department that works on these types of things. Military operations of the CCP focused on this. And a government branch called the United Front Work Department. They approach these organizations and try to get them to switch their allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. Because when they do that, the CCP gains control of that entire segment of that area, because they're connected all through the society. And then they use them to infiltrate media, businesses, police, intelligence agencies, government, inviting our officials on visits to China, all that stuff. So these organizations work on those types of operations on a huge level. That particular organization was one branch of several. And of course, you know, the one I believe involved with Black Lives Matter was the San Francisco branch, if I remember right. And a lot of people found the documents from the branch that was in Boston. And New York Times tried saying, well, that's the Boston, you know, branch, and it's different from the San Francisco one. And they tried writing off the whole thing based on that, which for anybody who knows these organizations was absolute nonsense. But Trevor,
Yeah.
what do you know about this organization? Tell us about it.
Well, it was founded originally by members of Iwar Kuan, which was morphed into a group called the League of Revolutionary Struggle. Now, both the Boston...
Yeah, not communist at all.
Yeah, completely Maoist, pro-Chinese communist. And the Boston branch, the New York branch, and the San Francisco branch were all run by League of Revolutionary Struggle. This was started, they all started in the 70s to start bringing communist Chinese influence into Boston, into New York, into San Francisco, which up to that time were mainly pro-Taiwanese. You know, the communists hadn't really made inroads in there at that time. So this was the beachhead. So they got them in there. The League of Revolutionary Struggle eventually morphed into Freedom Road Socialist Organization, now called Liberation Road.
Well, that's massive. Yeah, tell us about this.
Yeah, well, Liberation Road is the group that gave us Black Lives Matter. That's their front group. Alex Tom, who was for a long time the chairman of the Chinese Progressive Association, San Francisco, is best friends with Alicia Garza, the woman who founded Black Lives Matter. Alex Tom helped to set up a group called Asians for Black Lives. They wrote the manual for Black Lives Matter. They helped Black Lives Matter coordinate their activities around the country. Alex Tom boasts about his deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and he boasts about running his messaging past the Chinese consulate before he does things. He is, some of these people were in China in 2014. They went straight from communist China to Ferguson, Missouri, to the riots there, which were organized by the Organization for Black Struggle, which is another front for Liberation Road. So the Chinese, pro-Chinese communists burnt Ferguson, Missouri. They're behind Black Lives Matter, behind a lot of the rioting in 2017, in 2020. And then they used the same networks. Alex Tom helped to set up Seed the Vote. And Seed the Vote is this network of voter registration organizations working in the Black and Latino communities and Asian communities of the big cities in the 7 key swing states. And as I said, they claim they won 6 of the 7 they targeted for Biden-Harris. What I believe they did was they lifted the Black, Latino, Asian American, university student vote in those inner cities to help mask the pre-planned vote fraud. That's what I think they did.
Yeah, shocking stuff, Trevor.